welcome back. My name is Charlie, and I want to talk to you today about Was Willem. I know, I keep talking about this book. I've talked about it a lot recently. This was the best book that I read last month, and I think it deserves a full review. There's not a ton of reviews here on YouTube about this book, and I want to add fuel to that fire because I think more people should pick this up. More people should be talking about it. This is going to be a spoiler-free review because I don't want to ruin any major plot points or anything like that, but I do want to tell you enough about the story to entice you to pick it up, or at least that's my goal here. I am trying to get you to read this book, but because of that, I don't want to give anything away. So everything that I say is not something that I deem a spoiler, and some of it is going to sound like it's a spoiler, but that is due to kind of the predictable nature of this story, and I'll talk about that in a second. It's not a bad thing. This is a story about our main character, Was Willem. That's his name. His name is Was Willem, or at least that's the name he chooses to go by. His real name when he was born is Willem, right? He's born a little boy. His parents name him Willem. Willem gets really sick. Willem dies. And then his parents are very upset, and they find a sorcerer, and they ask him or plead with him to bring Willem back from the dead. And the sorcerer does it in a way, but there's a substantial cost, and the being that comes back from the dead is not the same exact being that was put into his coffin. He was in his coffin, and he started to kind of break down, and so when he comes back, his body is kind of reformed, and so it is all put together, but it's not quite right, and the person that's in there is not entirely whole. And so when Willem rises out of his coffin and goes back to find his parents, he doesn't look the same, and while he has the same memories, he has the same mind of Willem, something's different, and he knows it. He knows that he is not supposed to be here. He knows that he has died and that he came back kind of without his permission or without his request, or it was not his choice, and he doesn't feel whole. So it kind of sounds like it's a zombie story, right? Because it's a thing that dies and they come back to life, but it's a sentient zombie, right? So it's much more on the Frankenstein's monster side than like Walking Dead, like a true zombie type of being, right? I think they refer to him as more of a revenant. So that is kind of one half of the inciting incident, or like the one half of the beginning of the book, because this is a story told to us by Was Willem, right? So it's kind of utilizing like a framing narrative, I guess you could call it. So he's telling us his story, but he's almost more telling us somebody else's story. He's telling us the story of the sorcerer who did bring him back. And at times it feels like it's more that sorcerer's story, and it's just Was Willem telling it to us. And he's telling us the story of this sorcerer and how they came to be, and what their goal was, and how they were trying to get to that goal or achieve it. And then he tells of the people that tried to prevent him from doing that. And it's almost feels at times like Was Willem just happens to be one of those people that are trying to prevent it, right? But he's the character that he spends more time on. So he's more of a character than some of the other characters, but he doesn't feel entirely like the main character to me. The main character kind of feels like the bad guy, and he is a bad guy. The bad guy in this story is truly irredeemable. I feel like a lot of books, they'll make you kind of feel like, you don't always root for the bad guy, but you understand their motivations. And I understand this guy's motivations, but his motivations are just that he's a bad guy. He's a bad guy, and he wants to be a badder guy. He's essentially just like fully self-serving. Everything he does is really for him, right? And there's another bad person that we follow, or right at the beginning, there's the first chapter, we follow this baron who kind of ransacks a town, takes it over, and claims it as his own. And the sorcerer comes and works for him, but he is not really working for him. Like he kind of convinces the Baron, you should hire me and let me be your sorcerer. And the Baron's like, okay. And then from there, he just kind of manipulates him and gets his way. And he just uses that Baron. So he convinces that Baron to do a lot of things that even he the Baron thinks are bad. And he's like, I don't want to do that. That's a horrible thing. We can't do that. And the sorcerer's like, ooh, but you actually have to, because then I can protect you better, or something like that. And so that was cool. We're introduced to a different bad guy, and then the bad guy is like using him, which was nuts. And again, this is all very early on in the book. I touched on how this is like sort of a predictable story, right? Like it is using that framing narrative. And so it is Once Was Willem telling us this story of what happened. So we know at least that Once Was Willem is going to make it out of this okay, or at least in some way. He's going to be alive enough to tell us his story at the end of the book, right? That's how these framing narratives work, but it goes steps further than that, steps beyond just that. For example, the chapter titles, chapter 3, for example, is called Chapter 3, which treats of my death. Guess what happens in that chapter? Willem dies. that is the chapter that Willem dies, and it's that before you even read the chapter. You just have to read the chapter title. You could essentially go through this book just reading the chapter titles and have a pretty good idea of what goes down in the book as a whole, which is really interesting. Somehow M.R. Carey is able to do that, and it doesn't feel like I'm having everything spoiled for me, but it feels like I'm just being told a story. Once Was Willem is telling us the story, and it feels like an organic conversation sometimes. He's even, he'll be describing a scene, and he's like, oh, and this guy was in the back of the room, and he's not super important right now, but what you do need to know about him is like this, and that, and he will be important later, but we're just not there yet. So we'll get back to it. Ignore him for now. And that was interesting. Again, that happens in these types of books, and in Sun Eater, for example, like that series. Those are utilizing the same kind of narrative structure, and they do that there too. But just again, it just works, and I was just surprised by that every time it happened. I was just like, oh, okay, that just feels like I'm having a conversation, and that's just an organic way to have that conversation. It was really interesting, but it didn't feel like a present day conversation, because this is kind of written in this like old English style, or at least it's written in a way that sort of seems to be trying to emulate Old English. I don't know if it's like actual Old English, like how they would have spoken back then, but that's how it's written, in that style. And at the beginning, that was a little off-putting to me, and I thought, I had to like look up words that I don't use those words. I don't really know what those words mean, and that happened a lot. But then I did look up those words, and I got very used to it, and it was a breeze after the first couple of chapters, where it was a little bumpy just because I had to take breaks to Google what does this word mean. but again, don't let that stop you. If you start reading this and you're like, oh boy, this is a lot of this going over my head, just reread it a little bit and just push on through. You'll be fine. I'll read you an example of that. This is that same chapter that I just mentioned, chapter 3, which treats of my death. This is the first paragraph, and then maybe I'll do like another sentence beyond that. I really like this paragraph, and I think it gives you a good example of the writing and a little bit more about the story. Now I come to my own part in this story, and I see that it will not do. I had meant to tell it as though the events of my life lay all in a straight line, but they do not. How could they? My death comes in the middle, when for most people it is wont to mark the end, and the manner of my going away and coming back meant all things out of true. I cannot even say I and mean one thing by it, for I am two things, at least, and the second stands all askew on top of the first. So that's a little bit of a taste of how this is written. I grew to really like it. I got very comfortable in it, and I thought it was kind of poetic in a way. I've heard a lot of people compare this story to Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman, and I don't think that's a bad comparison at all. I definitely felt that when I was reading it. I don't know if that's because we're primed to think of Christopher Buehlman when we read this, because he's blurbed right on the cover of the book, but it did feel like that. It did feel reminiscent of Between Two Fires. Some of the themes are similar, some of the characters are similar, and the setting is very similar, and the overall tone is similar. But it felt to me more like if T. Kingfisher wrote Between Two Fires. By that, I mean it had a little bit of whimsy, a little bit of levity, but it still did feel creepy. I think people are calling it a horror. I didn't feel like it was a horror. Like, I wasn't scared at any point, but it was grimy and gritty, and there were moments where I was like, oh, that is a horrifying thing that is being described there. But the way it's written, I didn't feel like it felt like true horror to me. And I feel like that with a lot of T. Kingfisher stuff, where I'm like, yeah, okay, this could fall under the umbrella of horror, but Between Two Fires is a horror novel. T. Kingfisher's books feel like they're just outside of that. They don't quite land in horror, but they definitely make you uneasy. But there's just a certain levity to them that it's just shy of being a horror novel. And that's what I think this felt like to me. So I think I kind of told you what the story is about, right? It's about a little boy who dies and comes back. That's like part of what it's about. And it's also about this baron who takes over this town, right? That's part of what it's about. And it's really about the sorcerer that connects those two events, and how the sorcerer is hungry for more power, and how he's going to try to get that power, how he's going to achieve his goal of kind of just being the baddest bad dude he can be. I compared Once Was Willem to Frankenstein's monster earlier in this video, and I think that's a good comparison. Again, right near the beginning at least, this felt like very much like it was inspired by Frankenstein, the story of Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster. And that's very clear. I'm not reaching too hard to find that. He comes back, or he's reanimated, and he goes back, and he's not the same. He does not look the same. He's not the same person that he was, and his form that he's in now is pretty grotesque, and it's off-putting, and people don't want to look at that. And so he is shunned from town, much like Frankenstein's monster, right? And so it becomes this story of acceptance and finding your own humanity, even though you're being told you're a monster your whole life, right? And so he goes out into the woods, and that's where he lives. And there's a lot of story there that I'm not going to go into, but when he is in the woods, something that does happen is that he meets a cast of characters, and the way that he meets them was really interesting. It almost felt to me like there were a lot of short stories kind of strung together, like it's all very much connected, but his meeting of the characters, these other beings that he meets in the woods, they just all were kind of, like the M.R. Carey took his time to say, like, this is who this character is. This is their backstory. And I guess Once Was Willem took his time to do that, right? Because it is him telling us this story. And so it does feel like he's friends with these people, and he wants you to know fully who this person is. And then he'll tell you at the end of that chapter, which again, I feel like they felt like short stories. He'll just tell you, like, they'll come back. This is who they are. We'll get back to them. And then I met this person. This is who they were. We'll get back to them. And that's just kind of how the story goes, which is interesting. But all of those, like, I keep calling them short stories, like those short stories, all of those character introductions were really cool. Like, I would read more about all of these characters, and they're all unique. They're maybe not entirely, but they feel very original, at least in their depth. I can't give you too much more than that, really, because I was surprised to see who these characters were. I knew that there were other characters in here, but I didn't know who they were or what they were or anything like that. And so I want you to have that experience of finding that out. But they're really interesting. So look forward to that, to all of the characters in this story. Honestly, even some of the just like plain old human characters were cool, and there was, or not cool, but they were interesting, and there was depth to them as well. Not all of them, because there's a lot of regular old people living in the village, but a lot of them. I do think that the most interesting characters in this are these kinds of like monsters and the sorcerer and things like that, like these not fully human characters. But I think the interesting parts of those characters are the human aspects that we focus in on, right? Like the love that they have for each other, and the things that they have to overcome, and how they do that, and how they reconcile with the way that they are, and the way that people treat them. And it's just, it's really interesting the way that all that is handled. Again, the human aspects of these characters are what you really focus on. The good and the bad parts of being a human, the love, but also the greed, and it's just, there's a lot to it, to each of the characters. There's a lot more backstory than I would have expected on some of them, and on all of them I wanted even more, but that's not because I wasn't given enough. It's just because I really like them, and I want more of their story. And I do think this is a standalone. I don't think M.R. Carey has any plans to continue this story. It's a fully contained story, but I would read more about any one of these characters. So M.R. Carey, you're not watching this, but if you are, I'm ready for it. You feel free to write more about anybody in this book. I was surprised by the end of this book, also, that there was like a good amount of action scenes. Like the big things happen at the end, and there's a lot of action that goes down, and it's really well done. I don't care about like battle scenes and things like that typically. Like, I'm not huge on them, but these were really well written, and they were interesting, and the way that the characters were handling them were really neat. I have heard a couple of people say that they felt that the pacing was a little off by the end. I didn't feel like that. I've also heard people say that it veered towards the boring end of the spectrum at certain points. I think, again, by the end, I think I know which part of the story that these people are referring to, but again, I really didn't feel like that. I thought this was a really easy read, really well paced, really fun from start to finish. And it's not even a very large book, right? It's under 300 pages. I think it's like 294 or 96 pages. So it's a quick read. And so I wasn't bored at all. I think if I did have anything to complain about, it's just that there were a couple things that I felt we were built up to. Like, I was excited to see how this thing was going to happen, and then when it was about to happen, this other thing happened instead, right? And that was cool. But this the first thing, I felt like I was waiting for that. And I that's good, right? It's good when you're surprised, but I did feel, I'm thinking of specifically one thing that's, a fairly small part of the story. I very much felt like we were being led in this direction, and again, surprises are good, but I don't know how to describe it. It felt weird. This one specific example that I'm thinking of, the surprise felt like almost like a convenience, even though it was like it not convenient at all, but it felt like an easy way out of handling the situation the way that I thought we were going to handle it, because I was thinking like, oh, I have really no idea how we're going to do this. But then the way that it was handled, it was kind of by not handling it, sort of. And I don't know if that makes any sense. Even if you've read the book, you might not know what I'm talking about, but it just felt, I was a little let down by that one piece. So if I had any gripe, it'd be that. But I still gave this a 5 out of 5, and I would absolutely reread this one. I'm not big on rereads, but I'm like, I want to reread it actively. As soon as I finish it, I was ready to pick it back up again. I've heard the audiobook is really good. I didn't try the audiobook at all, but I watched somebody's review on it, and they said that they preferred the audiobook over physically reading it. So I'm very interested in checking that out sometime. So if I ever do a reread, I will do it on audio. But I had a great time with the print version of this. I would recommend it to anyone. And I think that's all I have to say about this one. 5 stars. Definitely a heavy recommendation from me. If you've read this, please let me know. I would love to talk to you about it in the comments. I would love to also talk about that one thing that let me down and see if it bugged anybody else, because I haven't heard anybody complain about it. So maybe that's just me. So let me know if you're curious. And if you have not read it, again, I urge you to do so. And when you do, let me know. I just opened the community tab here on the channel. So feel free to go there and let me know when you pick up any book. Honestly, I would love to talk to you about whatever you're reading over there. But that's all I have for you today. I will see you next week. Bye.